It's 1 week until the trade deadline, but we've got some moves to talk about. Is the three-team deal the theme of this year's deadline, and what moves are yet to come? Plus, a full weekend of games to preview and more coming up, all on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. How we doing today, Gil?
We are doing well. We're in March. It is March.
I know.
We have reached the home stretch of the NHL season, and the trade deadline is exactly 1 week away.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things about NHL trades is last minute scratches or pulling a guy off the ice prior to a trade. And that happened to Ilya Lyubushkin going back to the Toronto Maple Leafs from the Anaheim Ducks in a 3-team trade, also involving Carolina. And obviously the Leafs have been desperate for right-handed defensemen, playing with 6 lefties as of late, which, you can play with 4 lefties.
Yeah.
Maybe. But that's a rough go of it. Obviously, Mark Giordano had that awful head injury in the game against the Coyotes. And so I feel like, this was a move out of perhaps desperation at this point for them, right?
Yeah, and yet it brings back a familiar face and somebody who knows the team and the system. So if you're going to make a desperation move, I guess this one made a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's certainly the devil in this situation. But I think that, it was interesting because Carolina got involved in this deal. And this is the second deal this week to have a third team involved in the trade in order to facilitate some salary retention. Of course, when Dallas picked up Chris Tanev in that 3-team deal, New Jersey picked up some of that salary retention and got a pick in compensation for it. Similar situation with Carolina. And is this the future of the NHL trade deadline where, teams can figure out a 75% salary retention by involving a third team?
I think it's a great idea. I think this year, especially with the cap being relatively flat, still as we're trying to get things back to normal cap-wise from COVID, it's an even more valuable and important thing to incorporate because it does a couple of things. It allows these teams to make these trades. It probably lowers the compensation a little bit because the salary is less, and it rewards teams that are not way up against the salary cap, who manage the cap better or who are rebuilding and therefore are not way up against the cap. And they'll get extra draft picks and a little bit more for them to do at the trade deadline besides just selling. So I think it's a win-win-win across the board. But I think we are going to see more of it, at least this year when the cap is, still hasn't gone up substantially. It may not be a permanent thing, but I think this year we're going to see more of it.
Yeah, that's, I think, the next question, right? Is this a permanent trend or something that's just for this year? And, presuming the cap goes up significantly like it's projected to for next year, is that something that'll go away? Or is the level of contracts, because the cap will be going up, are the contracts going to then, the top contracts be higher, or even like your middle range guy is going to get paid a little bit more? And there'll be more need for this kind of salary retention. Is it like a self-fulfilling prophecy here, right?
Knowing NHL GMs, yes, it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And look, I don't begrudge the players their money,
No.
but the fact of the matter is that most teams, especially teams that are trying to win now, as they say, they're going to use up as much. I mean, how many teams this year have been juggling LTIR players in I will say questionable ways where, does the guy really need to be on LTIR? Well, we'll keep him on IR for an extra week and then we'll be able to save some salary cap space. So, whoever's idea it was to start this and be creative, I give them credit. And I think it is something we're going to see more of in the future. I mean, maybe not to the extent we see it this year, but I don't think it's going away entirely.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting in terms of having these sorts of trade options as opposed to doing a buyout in the off season and having dead cap space, right? So that this allows teams to make the trade, maybe not get as much in return as they want, and they have to facilitate by giving up maybe an extra pick, but it frees up the cap space for your next season instead of the buyout, and maybe having 2-3 billion in dead cap space for another year. So I think that it does allow teams to trade guys that maybe aren't on expiring contracts, right? If they have one more year left on those deals, maybe they can figure out a way using these 3-team deals in order to get them off the books sooner.
Yeah, that definitely works, and it sort of changes even the way the rentals are going. I mean, you look at the trade that was made earlier this week, where how much salary is the new team that acquires the player actually keeping, was like $250,000. That's almost like getting a player for very cap wise for nothing.
Right, it's below league minimum. I
Yes,
mean, could you
well below,
yeah.
well below.
So I just think this whole trend is fascinating. I think that we will see more of them at this trade deadline. I think there's a few teams that are a little bit more desperate to take that additional step toward winning a Stanley Cup now. I think that it allows teams who may have very little cap space to be in on the trade deadline. So it creates more excitement around trade deadline. So I, for one, am here for the 3-team trade trend.
I like it. I think it just opens up more possibilities. And we may see less first round picks changing hands as a result because they lower the compensation on these deals. It'll facilitate more trades. And that I think will make the trade deadline even more exciting and probably a little more active as well. And it's not always easy to get 3 teams to line up and be on the same page to finish up a deal.
Yeah, and I do wonder, what it means in terms of these teams with a lot of cap space, right? Where they're getting additional picks. Could that potentially increase trades in the off season or trades at the draft, because there'll be
Absolutely.
teams with a lot more picks, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, if you have 3 6th-round picks and 2 7th-round picks, you
Yeah.
can start making packages that, maybe that those extra picks, while they're not like earth-shattering, that could be the difference between a team that doesn't have those picks to offer and a team that does. If I'm getting those extra picks, maybe just maybe that's something that'll tilt me to team A rather than team B.
Yeah, man, I love the NHL. This stuff like this. It makes this part of the season so much fun to cover and so much fun to watch. There's more possibilities out there. So keep these three-way trades going, NHL. We love to see it. In the meantime, there are some potential other deals out there, some, top contenders to get moved at the deadline. We are going to talk about some of those deals coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and a lot more. And look, you can also use your hockey knowledge, NHL fans. Check out all the latest odds and prop bets for your favorite team on FanDuel. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. That's fanduel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
So after the couple of deals we've gotten, and I'm sort of assuming that another trade will happen as we're recording this show because that's the nature of things. But as of our recording right now, I think, one of the things that the Tanev deal really indicated, and you alluded to in the last segment, Gil, is that getting a first rounder in return for anybody, especially in this right-handed defenseman market, might be tough because Tanev was the top guy available, right? And he did not, because of the 3-team deal,
Right.
to some extent, get a first rounder in return. And as far as the contending teams, the team that does have first round picks is the Colorado Avalanche. Like they have a couple of them to spare. But I do think that in the grand scheme of things, it's going to be a tough market, I think, for the sellers here to some degree.
It is. And yet, you sort of, I guess, you give in one area and you take in another, because as we were talking in the last segment, if you can put together these 3-team deals, more trades could happen, even if you're not getting as much back for each deal. So you gain in one area, you lose in another area, but the idea of more trades, that to me is more exciting.
Yeah, and again, since I cover the Flyers, and Sean Walker has been a huge point of discussion in terms of defensemen. Now that the Tanev deal went through, I do know that there was talk that the Flyers wanted a first round pick in return for Walker. But it is also interesting because his D partner, Nick Seeler, has also been part of the conversation. And there's this crazy balancing game going on of seeing what kind of deals the Flyers could get for one or both of them at deadline, but also negotiating potential contract extensions with both of them as well. And so how do the Flyers balance a potential return against getting the best contract? Because I think Sean Walker has been a great addition to the Flyers, and I think would serve the team well moving forward. I think Nick Seeler is a really solid player, and I think his story is a really good one in terms of almost being out of the game and then really becoming a stalwart of the Flyers blue line. But I think he's a little bit more expendable in this situation,
Right.
but maybe not to John Tortorella. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm very curious to see what happens with Sean Walker, especially at deadline.
Yeah, that is something to watch. And the Flyers are just, one of those teams in the Eastern Conference that are battling for a playoff spot. They're in a playoff spot as of now, but you know, how do all these teams handle the trade deadline? And then, you're talking about defensemen. You still have, Matt Dumba out there from Arizona. You have Noah Hanifin from Calgary. Some names out there that are very, very likely to be on the move. And right shot defensemen, as you mentioned, are at a premium right now.
Yeah, Noah Hanifin, most of the conversation has been that he, might end up with the Tampa Bay Lightning, which
Mm-hmm.
I think would be very intriguing.
It would be. And, the Lightning are in sort of a different situation now where they're fighting for a playoff berth. And they've played a couple of more games than most of the other teams in this playoff race. So right now they are in a playoff spot, but they are not comfortably in a playoff spot. And, they're sort of an older team. Are they going to add at the trade deadline to try to make the playoffs again? I would think that's what they do. To me, it's either that or they stand pat. But I think they are going to try to make a move.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the last few years have felt like the last hurrah for this team every single year, and it isn't. So I don't know, but I do think that making one key addition for this team is something that Tampa could take a risk at, and so I think that is one of the more likely moves out there. Another likely move, I would say, is the Anaheim Ducks making another move and trading Adam Henrique.
Yeah, and Henrique, he's seemingly his name has been coming up in trade talks a lot, or trade rumors at least. And he's one of those guys who is very useful. He has experience. He can give you a little bit of offense, and certainly the Ducks at this point, they're not going to count him as a major part of their future, and they don't need him right now. They can finish where they are in the standings without him. What do you think that they would get, and what are some of the teams you think that would be most interested?
Yeah, I don't know here. I think that it's going to be obviously to a place where they need that extra depth forward, right? Whereas
Yeah.
like there's some teams that are really just more in the market for defensemen, but I do think that Henrique could. I don't know, man. It's tough, but I do think he will be on the move.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think I almost can see Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders going for Adam Henrique, even though I don't think that's necessarily the right move. And then I could see Lou Lamoriello signing him to a 5-year contract extension or 7-year contract extension. But that's one possibility. But Henry can help the right team. The question is at what cost?
Yeah, I mean, he could also go to the Rangers, I think is
Yeah,
a possibility.
absolutely.
Um, Maybe Boston, but I would say more likely the Rangers.
Hmm. I could totally see that.
But we shall see. I think, another big trade guy out there, which is also an interesting situation, is Jake Gensel, given that he's hurt, right?
Yeah, and you know he's not going to be healthy by next Friday. So whatever team takes him is not going to get him right away, and is not going to be sure when and how soon and how healthy he's going to be. And yet he may very well be the best available goal scorer at the trade deadline. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see how much the injury situation affects his value, and how many teams may be on the outside and say, no, we're just not going to do that right now. Or do you take a chance and give a little less compensation and say, okay, we got the best available guy. We just don't know how much we're going to get from him.
Right. I think, what Kyle Dubas does in Pittsburgh is going to be extremely interesting because he has so much. I do not envy him his job because he has to balance out, doing right by Crosby and Malkin with really having something left in the tank for the future. And I don't think those two goals are quite overlap as much as he would like.
Yeah, it's a very difficult balancing act, and the pressure is to get Crosby and Malkin and Letang one more Stanley Cup, get that last run. That's the sentimental choice, but realistically, I think retooling at least a little bit would make more sense for this franchise in the long run. But we'll see. Uh, to me, I think the pressure is going to be a little too much to resist.
Yeah, I think so. I want to talk a little bit about the goaltenders here because for I think what felt like weeks, we all thought Jacob Markstrom was going to go to the Devils, and it hasn't happened. And I'm just wondering, like, is that dead now, or is it something that could still go down?
I think it could go down. I guess the sort of tricky part is the Devils were getting some slightly better goaltending recently. And then you add, the fact that Calgary was hanging around in the Western Conference, and they're on a 4-game win streak now. So maybe they're a little less eager to make a substantial change like trading Markstrom. It'll be interesting to see how that goes between now and next Friday.
And another goalie that was, long in conversation, as you say, Saros from Nashville. They're on a 7-game win streak. Like, I don't know that they're gonna pull that trigger now.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a playoff spot if the season ended
Hmm.
today. So if I'm Nashville, 7 in a row, 8 out of 10, I may very well be happy to keep Saros and go for the playoffs a year earlier than expected.
Absolutely. All right. Well, there's a full weekend of action ahead that do have playoff implications that will then potentially affect these trade deadline moves. We will get into that coming up next. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer deals on last minute tickets, and with their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting excited for all the fun you'll have. My favorite parts of the Game Time app is that it's great for getting notified about those flash deals. Plus, you can get the all important view from your seat. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even sometimes up to an hour after it starts. So it's the place to find your last minute seat. Also, the tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So this weekend is a big one for a lot of teams. And I would say, one of the teams that it's going to have the biggest implications for is the Washington Capitals, who are facing the Philadelphia Flyers tonight.
Yeah, and the Capitals really have to decide whether they're going to be buyers or sellers, or they could just stand pat and say, we're going to let things fall, where they may. Right now, uh, they are on the outside looking in, but 6 points out of a playoff spot with 2 games in hand over Philadelphia. That's not an impossible margin to make up. And going head to head with Philly, I'll tell you this: winning this game in regulation would be a big deal for both of these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both teams are going to be really amped up for this one as well. The Caps will then later face the Arizona Coyotes on Sunday. So a couple of opportunities to pick up some points there for them. Looking at the lineup on Saturday, I think this Winnipeg Carolina game in the afternoon is a great way to start off the day.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not a rivalry game. These are two teams that don't play each other a lot, but two teams that are darn good hockey teams. You're going to see an entertaining game, and both of these teams are jockeying for playoff position and possibly first place. So they both need it. That's going to be a great hockey game.
Yeah, another game I'm looking forward to is the Avalanche versus the Predators. Like, I think that this is going to be a huge test to see if the Preds can continue their streak.
Yeah, big challenge to keep the streak alive. And, the thing about a streak when you're on the outside looking in and then it gets you to the playoffs, but it doesn't give you a lot of room for error going forward. It's in Nashville. That'll probably help the Preds a little bit, but this will be a challenge.
Yeah, and then in the evening, I love, love, love this Rangers Leafs matchup. I think it's going to be a grudge match. I think it's going to be a real test to see, okay, do the Leafs really need to make any more additional moves on the blue line, right?
Yeah, and the Rangers will certainly test that with their team speed and that top line. So, going to be interesting. And, right now, the Rangers trying to hold off Carolina. They've got a little bit of a cushion in the Maple Leafs. They can't afford to start a losing streak, even though they are right now solidly in a playoff spot.
Absolutely. And then your New York Islanders are facing the Boston Bruins. This is a big game for the Isles trying to get back into playoff spots, right?
Yeah, not easy to do it against Boston, who's battling with Florida for first place in the Atlantic Division. But the Islanders are coming off two nice wins in Dallas and in Detroit. They've got to keep it going. And Patrick Waugh, they're starting to adjust a little bit more to his system.
Yeah, and I wonder if this game for the Pens in Calgary will be the determining factor as to what they do at deadline.
It very well could. The Flames are just sort of clinging to playoff hope, seven points back, although they have 2 games in hand on Nashville. They desperately need the win. If the Penguins lose this game, maybe, Kyle Dubas basically says it's not going to be this year and doesn't act as aggressively or bring in any players at the trade deadline. A lot to be determined by these games.
Yeah, absolutely. I already mentioned the afternoon game between the Coyotes and the Washington Capitals. Again, big implications there. The New Jersey Devils will be facing the LA Kings on Sunday, and they're both teams that should, in theory, be doing better than they are this season. And so I think both teams are going to look at this game as a pretty impactful one.
I agree. And at least the Kings seem to be finding themselves a little bit more after that recent really bad streak that they had. The Devils still inconsistent, still looking for goaltending and still in the thick of that playoff race. Both teams need this game.
Yeah, and one of the later games, the Canucks at Anaheim, the Canucks have not been as strong as they were recently. 4-5-1 in their last 10. I think playing a game against the Ducks might give them the confidence boost that they need, right?
Yeah, that could, as they say, cure a lot of ills.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, the Pens with their Western road trip here, another back-to-back for them facing the Oilers this time around. That's going to be a tough one on the second half of the back-to-back for them.
Yeah, you would think they would prefer it to have the Oilers on the front end of the back-to-back,
Right.
but they don't make the schedule, so they've got to handle them on the back end. And again, we talked about the importance of this for the Penguins. Oilers need it too. They're fighting for playoff position. I love the schedule this weekend. I really do.
I do too. I think there's going to be a lot of really fun games, but a week to the trade deadline. When you see us next, it'll be that day. So I'm really excited about that show. It should be a good one. Looking forward to it. That will do it for today's show. And just a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe. And have a great weekend, everybody.